So you want to be an it girl?
Well, welcome back to Confessions of a Wannabe It Girl. Today we are joined by Lori, who is a teen and tween confidence coach. Welcome to the show, Lori.
Thank you so much, Marley. It's great to be here. It's nice to be, interviewed.
Oh my gosh, so nice. Yes, I am so excited
to confidence.
Talk about confidence, which is a huge part of this podcast. We were talking a little bit before about just like how big, honestly, confidence is even part of the title of this podcast. It's so much about like, I always used to use the example of like the Victoria's Secret model. She still wants to be a high fashion model. And really like, it has nothing to do with our external looks. You just mentioned to me how much it has to do with our internal dialogue. And like, I'm so excited to get into this.
Yeah. Cause I think that's the part, obviously I work with, tween and teen girls, but all of us at one point, we were that tween and teen girl. So she's still inside of us. And some of the different things that we've experienced, we carry them, through life. And that sometimes impacts, how we go out and how we show up in the world. So it's a lot of times what I share with the people that I work with, a lot of times it's the message that I'm also reminding myself of, so that I can continue to build my own confidence, because I think confidence is it's something that we grow and we develop, and it's not a destination. We never automatically get to this end point where we cross the line and, you get the medal that says you are confident, you're ready to go out in the world. Go out there. That's never going to happen. We're never going to feel like that. But if we think of confidence as a muscle, just like, when we work out or we train or we do something, it's challenging. It hurts. It's hard. It's sometimes painful, but that's where we grow in our bodies. And that's the same way we grow our confidence. So, and if we don't take risks, we're not growing that confidence muscle. So it's something that we just got to keep working at. So I'm glad that you like my message, even though sometimes a lot of it's for the younger girls, but
it is, but it's so much of even, and I was saying this, it's the same for me. Like, I feel like I started this podcast selfishly on some level to deal with like that myself and like remind myself every time, like I sit behind the mic or talk with people like yourself, that like these things are so much more built up in our heads than they really, really are. And, sometimes you just have to remember, like, it's not that important to be that way, do this way, whatever. It's just like,
exactly.
Be yourself instead.
Exactly. Yeah. When we were talking earlier, like when you were saying like the Victoria's Secret model, we assume sometimes when we look at someone that their external, how they look externally is their internal dialogue. And it's not, what they're experiencing is unique. We never know what someone else is going through and how they're perceiving themselves. But what I do know is that a lot of times, we're all in our own mind and, questioning how we look or how we appear or how we're showing up to others, and everybody else is doing the same thing. And when we can just remind ourselves of that, that can give us permission to be more of who we really are and to step into that. And that's where we start to feel a little bit more confident, because then it feels more comfortable and more authentic.
Right. So I wanted to ask you, when did this kind of like become your mission to help teen girls, and why?
Yeah. So I struggled so much in my middle school years and my high school years. I was a very, very shy girl. My family had a big move when I started 8th grade, and I just really, really struggled. And it wasn't until I was in high school, I took drama, and that really pushed me out of my comfort zone. And it's, you have to do things scared. You have to do things and you're not prepared. And that really helped me in learning how to build my confidence. And then when I went off to college, I wanted to do something that was going to help kids just like me who struggled. So I became a school counselor. And so I started working a long, long time ago. And I've been working with kids and families for 29 years now. And And I started my coaching practice in the Brave Girl Project. Specifically, I started in 2016, and I started it because my niece was experiencing a lot of relational bullying. And I was like, and so a lot of the girls at my school were really struggling. And I was like, we just need like a Brave Girl Project, like a place where we can really focus on the skills that the girls need. And research shows that in the ages like from 5th to 9th grade, there's a huge drop in self-esteem for girls. It doesn't happen in boys, it's just girls. There's like a 27% drop in confidence. And that doesn't resume. It doesn't go back to previous levels. And so that's where I wanted to really focus in on those girls to help give them some of the skills so that hopefully there's not so much of a dip in that confidence for them.
Just out of curiosity, that 27% we potentially lose, is there like a certain, is it the age? Is it social media? Is there a certain catalyst that is causing that?
There's several things. And so a lot of it is, I think, how girls are raised. So a lot of times we are rewarded for being a people pleaser. You know, we might think back to ourselves where maybe in school you were the teacher's helper and you would want to do things, or maybe you got nervous when, you know, kids were acting up and you're like, oh my gosh, this is like stressful. And so that there's part of how we're raised. And then, you know, this messages we have around beauty and, you know, what that means. When we look at puberty, the rates for puberty, the ages are going down. So then we have these really young girls in female, you know, like adult bodies, and it's, you know, uncomfortable and it feels, you know, confusing. And also girls do a lot of internalizing compared to boys. And so we might ruminate a little bit more over like our schoolwork or a conversation with a friend. So there's a lot of the different things that sometimes are just in play that really kind of come together in this perfect storm. And then you throw in hormones and all of that. It can be really tricky for our girls.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can literally speak from I'm still dealing with recovering from being the class teacher pet. And even I've even told my like good friend and teacher, I'm like, I'm working on recovering from it. She's like, yeah, you just do it innately. And I'm like, yeah, I know, like, I can't help it. And so that time is so part of your foundation.
Yes.
And it's going to stick with you. And like, yes, the ruminating. Oh my God. Especially when I was younger, and I would say even through college, like I would rerun conversations or things over and over in my head.
Right.
And then even though I'd rerun them and a situation would come up again, I still wouldn't act different.
Right. I think one thing that can be very helpful that I really try to focus on with the girls I work with is that like our thoughts aren't always true. And what you think about drives your life. That's going to steer you wherever you like, it's going to take you places. And so we really have to check in with what are we thinking, because that determines our feelings. And then those feelings determine your actions, your attitudes, your behaviors, and it just keeps cycling. So I think a lot of adult women are like still recovering from being that people pleaser, that teacher's pet. You know, when I talk with some of my girls, and I don't know if you can remember this, but when we were in school and, you know, we would listen to every single word that the teacher said in terms of like, okay, we're going to move on to a different topic, but the boys are still, you know, like just calling out.
Right.
We're like, oh, you're supposed to raise your hand, and like, we don't get called on. And when you see some of the numbers, girls have less voice time in classes compared to boys. So there's just how things are structured sometimes really work against us and keep, you know, continuing like a thought pattern or a behavior. And so then as adults, it's hard to break out of some of those patterns because we've been doing it all of our life, and society oftentimes rewards us, but then also sometimes penalizes us for the different things.
Can we talk a little bit about that like juxtaposition there? It's like, be assertive, blah, blah, blah. Like, you know, the recovering also like boss girl culture a little bit too. But then at the same time, it's like,
Yeah.
raise your hand, like have
Right.
perfect
Yeah, 'cause, like,
skincare, do the whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah, if you speak
that's
out
now.
or if you're too assertive, then, then that, when you look at the research for women in the work field, that, maybe they're very assertive and they speak their mind.
Mhm.
For a guy, we call him a leader, but for women, she's a B. And then it's like, how do you work around that where it's like, okay, I've got to speak my mind and share these ideas, but then I feel like I have to dance. I have to do this weird thing to make it happen. And that takes a lot of mental energy that just wears us down sometimes. And it does make us then like kind of ruminate or question and second guess ourselves.
Yeah. Something else I want to talk about, we touched on it like lightly. And it's a huge part of this podcast is kind of the idea of like being your own it girl. And I literally think I'm mind blown because even though I knew it, you don't hear it enough that like your looks don't equate to your inner dialogue. Yet we put so much success and pretty privilege on those who look and especially now perceive that life online. And it's like, what is the common thing that's like holding teens and tweens back from like actually believing they're enough? Is it always culminated in this like look thing, or is it we see that we don't look like that or don't live like that, so we're not like that? But then again, it has no true correlation, but we've deemed it that way so much.
Right. I think that part is so hard. And because like when you look at like the beauty industry,
right,
it's like $246 billion is spent in like advertising.
Yeah.
When you look at that, it's like 19 billion is spent on men. The rest is on us, on women and girls. And so there's this huge emphasis on appearance. And, and especially if you're a girl of color, a woman of color, a different abled body, you're not represented. And, so that is huge. This, focus on like thinness, like attraction, like just how you physically look, that is really, really damaging for our young girls. Depending on, for us women, depending, what our age and, what we've grown up using. Mm-hmm. But when you look at social media use for girls, we know that there is an increased risk of eating disorders. That's a huge, huge part that our young girls are experiencing. Increased rates of like low self-esteem, depression, body dissatisfaction, an increase in wanting to have, body changing surgeries. Mm-hmm. And then, we also know that it changes our brain when we're on social media or what we focus on, if we're focused on attractiveness. So when we see content that is appearance based, mm-hmm. that has a lot of likes, it activates a part of our brain. We're pulled into that content that attracts us, and it keeps us on the platforms. It keeps us, watching all the different things. And then after we spend all that time watching that type of content, we feel less satisfied in our own bodies. So I think there's so many different things at play, just culturally, how social media, how it impacts us, how things are marketed and sold to us, and that messaging that, you have to be successful. You have to be all these things. And it can be very overwhelming. And I did a reel today where I was talking about destination addiction, mm-hmm. where, because some of the teen girls that I work with, they're so driven. And so it's always the next destination, whether that's like this new project I'm doing at school, this sports team I'm trying out for. I'm going to be happy once I get here. Mm-hmm. And so they're always trying to get to the next destination. And that keeps them never happy, because it's like, my happiness will come when I'm here. But then comparison comes up where I feel, and I don't know a lot about the research perhaps, but like, I think we do a lot of comparison with other women and girls.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that impacts our ability to feel happiness in the moment, because then we're always on to the next thing. I have to keep pushing the envelope. I don't celebrate my successes. I don't take time to be in the moment. Am I doing
sure
this?
You just work with teen girls? Like, because I'm pretty sure these are like all the things I still deal with. Like, I'm like,
it really, the only thing that I think really changes
mm-hmm.
is our prefrontal cortex has developed more.
Oh,
that's the only thing that changed, right? Like we still are struggling with all the things because the message doesn't automatically change as we become adult women. There's sometimes then even more pressure that's put on us, than if you're, working and you want to be a mom and you're trying to balance career and family and you're trying to do all the things. So it's very tough. And it's like how to be, and that's why I love the title. It's like, you have to be your own it girl, and you have to define what that is for you.
Yeah.
Without looking, I think it's like kind of putting your blinders on and staying in your lane, because there's always going to be some shiny other object or something else that someone's doing. And we sometimes just focus too much on like a measure, like, should I be doing what she's doing? Or she has this great idea and gosh, maybe I should go in that direction. And so
in despair.
Yeah. And so we're never getting enough traction in our own path because we're too focused on the outside and what everyone else is doing. And it can really, waste a lot of time and energy and, all that creative things that each one of us brings. If we could only tap into that and allow that out into the world, that's what, the world really needs, our own true gifts.
Right.
So
everything you already have is enough. And I'm an actor. So the theater thing really struck with me. And I was, reading about acting recently, and it's like, it's so interesting that people get up on stage and think they have to do so much when you're already so interesting, just sitting there standing still. Yeah. And that's true of like your insides too. Like you don't have to do so much all the time, because what you're already doing is probably intriguing and interesting. If you're being a good moral human. And
just you're a human being. You're not a human doing, like just be, right? Just be a human, and humans make mistakes and we fail, and that's wonderful. And that's where we really get to know ourselves and grow. And if we're, just being in the doing, sometimes we get lost. So it can be, we want to definitely stretch ourselves outside of our comfort zone, but we also want to make sure, like, why am I doing this? Why is this important for me to do now? Because sometimes we might be doing things for the wrong reason, or because we think, oh, everyone else is doing it, or this is the path to success and I should do this. So if a lot of times with my girls, we talk about, what are the thoughts that you're having? Is it like, I should, I always, when we're doing that, we're being so critical, and that then shuts down creativity. That diminishes our confidence. And so we have to notice that, critical voice, and then try to shift and say, hey, I see that, Laura, we're not going to talk like that to ourselves anymore.
Right.
And
like, okay, so we were talking a little bit about, I feel like I'm talking about myself, but like, it's so much like, when I get there, I'll be happy when this thing accomplished. How do you kind of like train yourself starting at a young age, or if you got to do some corrective work, like patting yourself on the back now when you do achieve things?
Yeah, that I think is because I think we're raised to not brag. We want to be a nice, kind, sweet girl. Mm-hmm. And so I think a lot of times we think, like, if I were to say, like, oh my gosh, I totally rocked it in that interview, I was so good, I had insightful things to say, that's bragging. And so, because of sometimes like that social hierarchy between girls, like we don't want to outdo another person or come off, because we don't want to be judged seen as like that girl that is, she thinks she's all that. So we really have to work on spending time in it and celebrating. And so I think one thing that I have my girls do is we have a victory board, and you put something up on your victory board, or you write that in your journal, like what was a victory, and your victory can also be your failure. So because with that failure, like you showed up and you took a risk and you really tried something. So I think it's very hard. And I think it does take some, self-analysis and just noticing, like, am I really allowing myself to like honor myself and have self-compassion for me and this experience I'm going through? And, it's not a race. Like, really allow yourself to be in the moment. I think practicing gratitude can be very, very helpful. And then any type of, mindful practice, just having some moments where you can slow down and allow your breath and your body just to try and like connect and slow things down so that it's not always running and just always having to go to the next thing. Sometimes slowing down and being intentional with, I'm going to be slow today.
Yeah, I love that. And then like on the other hand too, I'm wondering if, because there's always this kid, or it looks this way, this kid, this girl, whatever, who like, it looks like, they made varsity soccer. They're an A+ student, whatever. And like, they are getting all the things that like graduate them, but just because they're getting them, like, aren't they still dealing with their own issues? Like,
they are. And I think there's this, because we look at that outside picture, and that's just like how like social media, like we see the highlight reel. And when we're looking at the outside, wow, they're so successful. They're having all these things that I would just die to have that, accolade or that opportunity. But we don't know what someone's, experiencing really on the inside, or the level of stress or damage that they're doing to their body to be at that level. And sometimes I think we look at something and we think, oh, I want that.
Right.
But when we really kind of chip away, what is it that you really want? Sometimes we just want like to feel connected to other people or to feel validated. And it doesn't have to be this, this like crossing a finish line type of moment. There was a young gentleman that I just watched he was a valedictorian at his high school, and he did his valedictorian speech, and he was sharing how much he gave up for that. He found out like during his junior year that he was in running to become the valedictorian. And so he just went completely into making that his reality. And he said, for 10 minutes, what I gave up to, like basically what I said no to for this one yes, to stand up here and give a 10-minute speech, it doesn't, give me what I really want. So sometimes I think looking at, is what you're chasing really going to give you what you want? Because a lot of times maybe what we're saying yes to, there's so many other things that then we're having to say no to. And that might be saying no to yourself.
Right. I've heard so much talk about like if you say no to an opportunity or a thing, you're really saying potentially yes to the better thing, so many other things. And like, that's so true. But particularly in high school, I think it's really hard when they like dangle achievements and placements, like varsity and whatever.
Because like school is a competition, because we're trying to outdo your friends, your classmates, your peers, because you have a goal that you're trying to get to, and that there's only so many spots at that goal. Right. Whether that's like maybe a college or an internship or some sort of experience that you're working towards. And so that's, I oftentimes, having worked in the education system for a very long time, I think there's a lot wrong with that, how the educational system is set up, because I don't think that it really helps us in terms of, like first, like our mental health. When you look at, high school kids are more stressed than the majority of high school kids are more stressed than their parents. When you look at that level of stress, and there's just so much, the kids I live in the Northern Virginia area, right outside of Washington, DC. And it's just like, go, 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 go. Any opportunity, you're going to take it. You're going to work at it. You're going to do multiple things. I have some clients where there's like, when do you have downtime? When do you have time to watch a movie? Like, when can you watch Netflix? And there's not time for that. And there has to be time for that.
And what is like the benefit of that? Cause like, I'm looking at that like later in my life. And honestly, I've been struggling with, I don't get a gold sticker on some stuff. I'm like, I'm working the hardest. I should get that sticker.
Right.
So it's like, set up a false expectation for me in my career. Like,
right. Well, and that's where I think we have to really tune into what is it that like feels good intrinsically for me. Mm-hmm. And what would I do? Like if fame weren't, like fame was never going to happen, or financial, like what would I still be doing? What would still be important? What, maybe it's just even impacting one other person. Is that still going to drive, you and fulfill you? And so I think sometimes what really motivates us intrinsically is important to focus on and really listen to that and get curious about what that is.
Right. No, absolutely. I think like there's so much to unpack, and it's such like an influential time that like you do hold on to for like the rest of your life, just like thinking like, this equates to this gold star, and that varsity place means I'm going to be the best person at my job later and down. Right. And they don't even pan out.
Right. And I think, right, because it feels like you're getting a guarantee, right?
Yes.
If I do this, I'm guaranteed to have a happy life. I'm guaranteed to have success. And we're not. Life is so unpredictable. Life is not fair. There's so many different things at play. And so sometimes I think it would be so much better for like our teens to do less, and to take it a little bit easy. And just like, I'm also a parent. So I think sometimes what happens also is we, in turn, as parents, we have our friends, we hear our coworkers sharing the different things that their kids are doing. And we're like, oh my gosh, like we got to get on it. We got to get you started on this. You should do this and this and this. Totally. And it just keeps, it going. And it's driven sometimes by fear, right? We are wanting to be feeling connected, and we want to have this sense of like, wow, like I can contribute, and I have this sense of what I can do and add to the world. And that sometimes can take us in a negative direction and just keep us just chasing something that isn't maybe worth chasing. It's not helping us in the end.
Right. Because also like what happens when, not this young gentleman, because I think he's actually a little aware already, but like,
I was like, oh, I loved it.
Yeah, I love that. But like, what happens when we're the valedictorian and then you get fired from your job at 25,
Right. Because then there's shame, right? Because, oh my gosh, what people are going to judge me. Like the expectation is that I, should be, here now, because this is where I was. The trajectory then is set. It's like this path that I should be following and I should be on, but there's no clear path for any of us. And there's going to be so many ups and downs. And when we let our confidence be on the like external things that we don't have control over, we are always going to be experiencing ups and downs in our confidence then, because it's based on other things that we don't have control over at all. And that will always, keep us feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm a mess. I'm still here, at this job. I should be somebody, somewhere else. I should be at, this upper management, or I should have this many followers, so just giving ourselves grace and just knowing it is not, whatever we achieve, it doesn't mean there's like a free pass to the next step.
Right. Yeah. So the only thing you can really be in control of is your own behavior and like your own
and that goes to your thoughts.
Right. So your thoughts and your behavior.
Exactly. And so, and I think what happens sometimes is when we look at situations in our lives, we look at it kind of through a lens. We don't get it to a place where it's almost neutral. What we want to do is kind of strip some of the judgments about the event. We want to get it to where, like, if we went to court, what would everybody really agree happened?
Mhm.
So kind of think about the situation that way. And then what were the thoughts around that? And what emotions come up because of those thoughts? And then when you have those, maybe those negative emotions, how does that impact some of the actions you're taking? And then what results does that really give you? You know, and so sometimes then what we have to do is kind of go back and intentionally, what could I start to think if this happens again?
Right.
What would be a more supportive thought? Or maybe what's the result that I want to have, or the actions I really want to take? And then working back, okay, well, what are the thoughts of a person who would have those type of actions? What thoughts probably do they have? And how can I make those mine? Or how can I, maybe I don't fully believe it yet, but what would be maybe the stepping stone to almost believing that? Like, what's the next step down that maybe I could believe about myself?
Yeah, I agree. Cause like before we have to go to like the court and be like, what was actually made up and whatnot, it's like on the base ground, like what's the behavior we can do before we have to do that. So like, okay, there might be a time you have to take yourself to mental court and like be like, that was made up, that was actually said, whatever. But then the next time, let's try not to go to court. And it's like,
right. Yeah. Like, how can we? Right. And that's just becoming more aware. One thing that I think, well, with a lot of the girls that I work with, they're not very familiar with their feelings. Okay. And so one thing that like I really try to focus on is really building like a feeling vocabulary with young girls. And that's something, I don't have it up. I had it up, but I have like a feeling wheel. And so we look at, you know, what are the different things that you feel over the course of a day? And when we can start to get curious about that, it can help us sometimes identify different things, because some feelings we have are secondary emotions, like anger is a secondary emotion. Usually there's something underneath the surface that was triggered first, you know, maybe embarrassment, guilt, fear. And so then we have that first, but then it triggers the anger. And so a lot of times when we can get curious about the feelings and just build that for ourselves, it can help us.
I'm so curious. I love this idea of this wheel, and that you ask them, because sometimes we don't, even as adults, don't have the vocabulary to speak on it.
I know. Cause like sometimes at the end of the day, like sometimes I'm like, wait, how do I feel? Like,
I'm listening to you say that. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's how anger comes from, like embarrassment or whatever. And I'm like, oh, I haven't linked that together in a while. What are the feelings that, I'm just curious, out of the girls today you work with, comes up the least?
Oh, that comes up the least in terms of,
like, it's the least, like they don't know how to express it. And then when they find out, it's like an aha moment of like, oh, that's what that feeling is. I
think a lot of girls have a difficult time with feelings of jealousy.
Ooh, I did not expect that.
Yeah. So jealousy is one of the ones, because they don't want to feel bad that it's kind of like two-sided. Like, I feel bad. Like, I'm a bad person if I feel jealous of this person, but then like, it's also not fair that this other person has this thing. I have this feeling of jealousy. And so I think for some of the girls that I work with, jealousy is a hard one for them to talk about and process, because I think they put a lot of judgment on themselves because they sometimes have those feelings.
Yeah. No, I could totally get that.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's, you know, and like what I tell them, like, it's okay. It's like normal. It's like good that you have those feelings, because sometimes jealousy is a sign of like something else that you might want, or that something else that you might need. And so then like, maybe there's something you want to do. And, you know, we can kind of have the daydream of like, we call it like a bulldozer, or I call them like a doormat with spikes, where it's like the passive aggressive, where, you know, you kind of do something like, oh, well, that's good for you, that you might say to a friend, but you're really jealous. And you kind of do that offhand, like, oh, it's good for you, kind of get back. And we can visualize that in our head, but we don't act on it.
Right.
So I'm trying to think of some of the other feelings that are hard for girls. I think sometimes, feeling pride. I think that's a hard one. I think shame is something that's a very uncomfortable feeling.
Oh,
that, right.
Nobody wants to express shame
right.
ever. Yeah.
And I think a lot of like all through like school, you want to feel a sense of belonging.
Mm-hmm.
So that feeling of like rejection. I do have a lot of people who talk about it, but it's hard to talk about it because then it's like, well, what's wrong with me? Like, why am I being rejected? Or why don't people like me?
Mm-hmm.
What will, if I'm sharing this with someone, what are they thinking about me? Will they then in turn also reject me because then they realize there's like this awful thing about me that people just don't like. So I think those can be tough emotions and feelings for anyone to work through.
Right. And just articulating them is so hard. And another thing that's super hard, I think sometimes for women, and it starts when you're a girl, is like, or it has been, it's not always, let me clarify that. It's not always been a thing. It's not a problem for every girl. It's like assertion. Like we talk to so many people in the entertainment industry and like, we're really working in the entertainment industry to shift to a more female focused voice coming through, but like it's still a very male dominant industry. And like I just hear so much about women, and we were talking about like if you're assertive in the workplace, then you're a B, but if you're a man, you're good job,
right.
What are the things you can start doing if you're young? And I think I'm dealing with my teen kid now, like to like start building that assertion muscle.
Yeah. So that, and what I like to think about is like, think of a ladder. Mm-hmm. And at the top of the ladder is like the ultimate goal, like, like I'm going to be this woman or this girl that can go into a situation and say X, and so looking at, okay, well, where do I need to start? Like, what is the smallest, littlest step that I can start taking to become more assertive? And that may even look like going to a restaurant and, changing your order or getting something and saying, this isn't, the steak isn't well done enough. I'd like to send it back. Mm-hmm. And so doing things where we have to get comfortable being in discomfort. So anytime that we can start small with that, I think is so important. Mm-hmm. And being able to forecast possible situations that might be coming up in your life where you then can, okay, I'm going to try to assert myself. Like I have a meeting coming up and, I want to kind of pitch this idea to my boss. Mm-hmm. Role playing that. Role play is like one of the best things that all of us could do for ourselves. And that could look like having that conversation in the mirror. Mm-hmm. And saying, practicing getting the words out, because the more that you actually either physically do it or mentally rehearse it, you've already done it. And so then you get better and better at it. And that helps you feel more confident when you have to assert yourself.
Yes.
And then I think sometimes also we can look at like the different words that we use. Because sometimes, and there's so many people, and I can't think of any creators right now, but there's people on Instagram or TikTok, and I watch some of their videos and it's like, wow, that is an interesting way to say that. Or sometimes I do, like maybe there's a qualifier like, oh, I don't mean to interrupt.
Right.
But just noticing when we might do some of that and how can we say things and feel more confident saying it without having to do qualifiers with it.
Right. The little bumper into it. We don't need it.
Yeah, because we still, it's like, oh, how can I be, seen as nice and kind and a team worker? And so.
Right. And sometimes, like, I mean, I use this example. It's not maybe the best in the context of the situation, but if you are in an outfit that just isn't flattering, whatever, and it's like, you can be the friend to be like, hey, I don't like, I know you can look better, or like, oh, I love it so much. And it's like, it's really better just to be the friend who's like, hey, like, I know there's like, let's go find something, like, just say exactly what you mean.
Right.
And go for it.
Well, and that's such a good point, Marley, because I think a lot of times we dance around things too much. And we're not really speaking our mind. So then that feels unclear, like, because then that doesn't feel assertive.
Right.
People are still like, wait, what does she want? Or what is she asking for? Or, so when we can be more clear and speaking our mind and sharing what we want or what we feel or what we need, that then that's where our power is going to be. And it's going to be more authentically yourself, which, it can be challenging and feel a little nerve-wracking, but, being more upfront and honest, I think can be very important.
And I think that showing off your self-worth, I don't think that doesn't mean you don't have it already. Cause I think so many girls have good self-worth, but just don't yell it from the rooftops. And like, when you do something like that, you're literally broadcasting it.
Right. Yeah.
I love that.
I think one thing that we can do as women, that can be important for like the younger girls in our lives, or just to be like a positive role model, is just really also lifting other women up, always watching, never putting another woman down. Making sure that when we're saying something like, is this helpful? Like, is this something that's going to add benefit? If I comment on how, like someone, like the job that they have, or, oh my gosh, I can't believe she wore that, that there, that's different than being the friend that's like, hey, like, yeah, I can tell that you don't feel comfortable in this outfit.
Right.
It doesn't look like it's not your personality. There's so many other things that would look beautiful on you and that I've seen you in that are beautiful. You don't have to wear this because everyone's wearing this.
Right.
But making sure that we're the ones that are uplifting other women, and that we're making that scene, and that we're encouraging that with all the other people that we come in contact with. And that's why I think things like this, like podcasts, like, oh, let's have this other person share their message. Let's give them an opportunity to help educate us and to help share their voice. And that's a wonderful way that you're helping that. And so, it is important. And so I think, that's one thing.
Go ahead.
Yeah. And I think that's one thing that we can do as women to make sure that, we are really, really genuinely lifting each other up, so that the younger girls can see that. And that one thing that I changed, like on Instagram, I used to use filters.
Yeah.
And gosh, it felt so nice to use a filter.
Yeah, it feels great.
Yeah. I'm 51 and it helped me look a little bit younger. And so then I was like, I love this. But then I realized, oh my gosh, like I have all these girls. I don't want them to think that this is something that they have to use or do. And so that was one thing that I was like, okay, no more filters.
Yeah.
And so I think for us as women, like, how can we then, and it doesn't have to be filters, like I understand, but like, how can you authentically show up and be?
It's like, this hasn't even happened yet, but like, I'm taking my little cousin to Disneyland. She's 17. She's not a baby, but she's little, right? And like, oh, it'd be so fun. But like, if there is somebody in line and, I think she's acting crazy or whatever, I'm like, she looks really like she's causing some chaos and whatever. And like, instead of like pointing it out to like my little cousin, just being like, like she gets to do her, and just like letting people do their lane is
exactly.
And like modeling that behavior for which I think it's hard, but what is your non-filter moment? Everybody's you have to find your own.
You have to find your own, and it doesn't have to be. Yeah. And I think that one thing that I know that like, I also try to do is like when I'm out and about, like compliments, like giving like a really genuine, heartfelt compliment to anybody. It doesn't have to just be women, but, letting someone know that I see them. A big part also that I try to do is that it not necessarily be about appearance, that it's maybe something else that's more about their personality, or something that I just saw them do that was just so kind, or that it was like a thoughtful gesture. So,
yeah, because we do always just default to, I like your shoes. I like your clothes. You have great skin. Like we always default to those. Yeah. I think it's important to pick a compliment that isn't always like that, because that is more investigative than just what we can see.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Like that took time and effort to kind of chip away and to see that you really had to look to see it.
Well, you're also bettering yourself by doing that because you're pushing yourself to dig. And so it's a twofer.
Yes, exactly.
We love it.
You can't beat that. You know, it's always
you can't beat that. So, I mean, confidence is a huge topic. And I feel like we did not even scratch the surface, but like, what is a long-term habit or thing you want to see women start doing for themselves now? It could be any age. It could be teens. What is something we can do?
So I think the biggest part is to practice some sort of gratitude or self-compassion. So like that could be at nighttime, or it could be when you first wake up, picking some things that you're like, I'm so grateful for to have this in my life or to have this experience. But then also, what is it that I truly love about myself right now? Mm-hmm. And so really focusing on that and allowing yourself to feel that. And some of my girls will share that, like, sometimes they even get a little teary in the morning or at bedtime when they sit with those feelings. And so to really just see yourself and be with yourself, I think is one of the best things that we can do. And then another thing that I think can be very helpful is, you know, being in like a community with other people that are, in a sense, like pushing you. You're stretching yourself, but you're doing it with support or encouragement or positivity. And that you have, whether it's like your friendship circle, if it's your family circle, your colleagues, but that somehow there's someone or a group of people in your life that are pushing you and encouraging you, and you're doing the same for them.
Yeah.
And that you can share and celebrate successes. And you can also, you know, share the realities of the struggle maybe that you might be in, and having a place where you feel safe to do that. And if you don't have that yet, that being what you try to cultivate for yourself. And just knowing that, because sometimes we wait to be invited, right? We're thinking, oh, I just want someone to invite me. If you're looking for it, you should then create it, maybe, because there's other people that want it and they're just also just waiting to be invited. So create like a safe, caring community that you can help uplift, but that can also be there to uplift you. And I think that's where we can help to build confidence.
Yes, I agree. You're the sum of the people that surrounds you, but you're part of their sum too. So it's not a, you know, all or none thing, because that's one of my favorite quotes is like, you're the sum of the people, the 5 people you're closest to, but you're a reflection of them too. So you got to pull your weight.
Exactly. And I think that part, like, you know, if you don't have that yet, or maybe you're realizing that's not at all, like I'm in a toxic workplace, or my friends are, you know, sometimes some of my girls are like, my friends are full of drama, or they're just surface, they're not deep. Yeah. And then, okay, like how are you, you know, how are you sometimes surface? How are you showing up as deep? Like, so if you're looking for it, how are you also doing that? And I think that's, you know, how do you show up too?
Oh my gosh. I could talk to you about this for hours. Like, literally could not be more of like the main pillar of what this podcast is about. So thank you so much for taking the time to do the show. Please tell everybody where we can find you.
Yeah. So you can find me on Instagram, Facebook. It's The Brave Girl Project. And my website is thebravegirlproject.com.
Great. Thank you so much, Lori. Like, it has been incredible.
Well, it was so nice. It's always nice to talk about this with other people, and just to be able to like kind of share some of that, so that it's like, you know, dropping the pebble in the pond and letting it ripple out and hoping that it helps support other people.
Yes. Couldn't agree more. Guys, thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next Tuesday.